having a great day so far. One thing that we all absolutely hate to do is to wait. We hate it, don't we? And in our culture really tells us that if we are waiting, it means that something is wrong. If we're waiting in traffic, it means there's been an accident. If we're waiting in line at a store, it means the credit card machine isn't working. If we are waiting for our food at a restaurant, it might mean the kitchen is backed up or our server forgot to put in our order. We hate to wait, and we receive waiting with the message that something is wrong. But that's not the way God sees waiting. In fact, He often prescribes it in our lives, and He can use it on purpose and for a purpose. In Exodus 23, we see the Israelites. This is after the Exodus, so they have left Egypt, and the Lord is speaking through Moses and giving them kind of a glimpse of what things are about to look like as they go into the promised land, which of course we know that ends up not happening now, and that they wander for 40 years. But first, the Lord gives them this idea of what the process is going to look like as they go into the promised land. And in Exodus 23, verse 30, it says, this is God speaking. He says, "Little by little, I will drive them out before you," them being the enemy, all of those currently living in the promised land. "Little by little, I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land." Victory would come. God would bring His people into the promised land, and He would give them victory over all of the other nations that currently occupied the land of Canaan at the time. But the victory was going to come little by little. There would be waiting in order to get to the full victory. God often works this way. If He immediately ends a hard situation or a valley in my life, or if He immediately gives me victory, I don't have to cling to Him and trust Him through the waiting. And I'm prone to wander, and I'm prone to forget. But the waiting, it's painful. And when things are a little painful, I tend to remember things a little bit better. I tend to remember my dependency on God a little bit more. And waiting can be such a fruitful time. We are created for relationship with God. He just wants us to be close to Him. And when we are waiting on something, when we are waiting on victory, or when we are waiting on an answer to prayer, we pursue the Lord a little bit more, don't we? We cling to Him a little bit more. And we always taste a fresh level of His presence. And man, our faith grows through that time. But the temptation in the waiting, of course, is to get impatient and to take matters into our own hands. We just want to get to the other side of it, don't we? We just want the hard thing to be over. We just want to be on the other side of the valley. But it doesn't work that way. In Exodus 32, the Israelites have grown impatient. And they are not sure what Moses is doing up on that mountain, but they're not seeing any progress, any movement from God or from Moses. And so they grow impatient in the waiting, and they take matters into their own hands. Exodus 32 verse 1 says, "When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, 'Come, Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." They couldn't see that anything was happening, and they grew impatient in the waiting. And so what ended up transpiring is they fashioned an idol, a golden calf, and they worshiped it. Their impatience and their flesh and that tendency to take things into their own hands, that led them down a very steep and slippery slope of idolatry. And it had severe consequences. We're told later in chapter 32 and into chapter 33, the consequences of that. Thousands were killed, and they were struck with plague, because sin always has consequences. But God, he says something very different about waiting. He has a very different perspective on it than we do in our flesh or than our culture does. In Psalm 27, verses 13 through 14, it says, "I am confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." What's described in these verses, this is an active and strong posture. This is a confident expectation of the work of the Lord. This is a purposeful and fruitful waiting. Isaiah 40, verse 31 echoes this same idea, that waiting, there's strength that we find in waiting. Isaiah 40, verse 31 says, "But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint." Waiting is the way to renewed strength and to perseverance. So what are you waiting for? What prayer have you repeated over and over and over again before the throne of grace of our good and kind God, but you're still waiting on an answer? This week, let's be women who don't believe the lies of the culture, who don't believe the lies of our own flesh as far as what waiting is, and that it's a bad thing or that it means something's wrong. Let's instead choose to believe the truth of God's word and what he says about waiting, and trust in his timing, little by little. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you soon.